What is the most disturbing secret you found about your partner that made you walk out immediately? My ex and I bonded over very severe and strikingly similar childhood trauma. Almost a year into our relationship, he revealed, extremely casually, as if it were nothing, that he had made it up. He had heard about my past from a former mutual friend and thought I would be easier to get close to if we had this in common. He genuinely did not see a problem with this. He then asked, since it bothered me, if I wanted to know everything else he had made up as well. It turned out that about 3/4 of what I knew about him was fake. Weird, funny stories, childhood memories, experiences he claimed to have had at work. He had just invented them. When I asked why, he repeated that it was not a big deal and said he felt I needed to be humbled a bit because my life wasn't that interesting, so he made things up to match my stories and experiences. Story 2. My ex, my husband, and to be clear, we had been married for only 1 month when I found this out, had orchestrated a whole wife swap situation with his aunt and uncle. Yes, he wanted me to be with his uncle while he with that uncle's wife, all in the same bed. He didn't see any issue with it because, in his mind, no one involved was biologically related to their partner in the swap. This was something he and his family member had planned for weeks in advance. The idea was to get me drunk at the family reunion in the middle of nowhere. Literally, not another house for miles and no cell service, and then go through with their plan. I got in the car and left alone in the middle of the night, terrified, during the 3-hour drive back home. Story 3. My ex told me at the beginning of our relationship that in his first relationship, his girlfriend had suspected him of cheating because he used to stay at work really late since he was a manager. He said that one time she came to his job crying because she thought he was cheating and because she had a miscarriage, and he ignored her. He claimed he did not know she had miscarried because she had not communicated that to him, and he insisted he had not been cheating, just working hard. Months later, after I reassured him that it was not his fault, that he was a good person, and that accidents happen, he finally confessed that he actually had been cheating with a coworker. It completely changed the way I saw him. Story 4. I raised her son for 6 years, starting from when he was 1 year old, and I still do. On his 7th birthday, I was strapped for cash and couldn't afford a huge gift or a big party at an establishment. Instead, we had a completely normal, loving, traditional birthday at home, with decorations, cake, and ice cream. Many friends and family showed up and showered him with gifts. Leading up to the event, she felt distant and really hateful. I already felt awful, but the day before the party, she suddenly reached out to the biological father, who had never once called to establish a relationship in 6 years. She never put him on child support, which was fine. I didn't want or need that. She asked him to get a VR headset for her son, allowed them to video chat, and said he would get paid the next day, the day of the party. She even used some form of Affirm payment and spent money we didn't have, but he never sent any money and didn't purchase the VR headset at all. She was a stay-at-home mom, so technically I was the one paying for everything. She defended her choice to seek that shallow gift for her son, claiming he deserved it. I had provided amazing birthdays every year until that one. I had just purchased too much house that year. I felt betrayed and disrespected, and she twisted it, trying to convince me they deserved better. If I hadn't confronted her about the odd behavior, she would never have told me where the VR headset came from. I also would never have known about the video call. I'm not possessive either. I'm a former foster child, and I completely understand. Some parents aren't able to be there during certain chapters of their child's life. But in this case, there was no effort to discuss or express concerns about the quality of the gift or her desire for them to have a connection. I believe a grown man should not need reassurance to be part of his child's life. And guess what? Guess who's on child support? Me. Because she needed EBT, she refuses to take a raise. Otherwise, she'll lose her benefits. She used my name and labeled me as a deadbeat to the government for $100 in food stamps. Meanwhile, there's a man fully capable of being on child support who hasn't done the legwork I've put in to earn the title of father. I don't know. I'm still all twisted up about it and am getting ready to just walk away. Story 5. I was engaged to an amazing guy, or so I thought. We had been living together and dating for 3 years, and we were planning our wedding. He had never been married, had no kids, and both of his parents had passed away when he was a teen. He had one brother, who he said was hospitalized and dying of cancer. My fiancé spent a lot of time at the hospital, but I had never met the brother. He was very successful and lavished me with trips, gifts, cars, you name it. He often worked out of town, but we made it work. Imagine my surprise when, by sheer coincidence, I met his dying brother at a party. My fiancé wasn't with me. It was a strange conversation, to say the least. Nothing I had been told was true. His brother said, "He's been a liar his entire life. Do you want to talk to my mother?" What? Hell yes, I do. His parents were very much alive, and his brother had never been in the hospital and did not have cancer. Walking into his parents' home was surreal. There were pictures everywhere of my fiancé with his wife and kids. He was still married, living with his wife, and unemployed. He had been stealing from her to afford all the gifts he was giving me. I felt like I was living in Bizarro World. It was mind-blowing how far he went to maintain his lies. I left him on the spot. He died 2 months later of OD in a cheap motel in Reno. Story 6. My ex used to make up elaborate stories about being in the Greek mafia, even though he never was. He told me he had a ton of money from mafia work, and that he bought his parents' house and their 4 cars, his mom's, his dad's, his own, and his brother's. In reality, his parents were well off on their own. His mom was a high-level executive, and they clearly paid for everything. Conveniently, he lost all this supposed mafia money very early into our relationship. He kept piling on more lies, including claiming he had killed someone for the mafia and had trauma from it. He was Greek, but not in the mafia. He would go to Greece every summer for at least a month. When he returned, he would be massively depressed because he hated America, though I never understood why he was even here, and claimed he had nothing here. He would get upset if I took it personally. While in Greece, he would party and get wasted every night, eat excessively, and come back 50 pounds heavier, like a full-on eating and drinking binge. Every time I was vulnerable with him and confided in him, whether about my childhood or jealousy of a friend, he would throw it in my face during the next fight, saying things like, "This is why your dad doesn't love you," or "This is why X-friend prefers Y-friend over you." Every grad school exam he had for 3 years, he would get massively cracked out on Adderall for 2 days straight, then take the exam and proceed to drink for 48 hours to come down from it. Super healthy ritual. He called all my friends losers, and I had to beg him to hang out or do anything with them. He constantly put down my appearance, even after I told him I had an eating disorder growing up. Mind you, I'm 5 feet 9 inches and 140 pounds and go to the gym daily, but he still didn't think I was fit enough for his liking. Anytime he got mad, he would throw things across the room and at me. He was also physically, mentally, and emotionally abusive in many other ways, but I won't go into more. Story 7. 4 days ago, I found out that my partner of 8 months, who had been making claims about building a life with me, wanting children with me, and wanting to live with me, was a cheater. I found his dating profile and reached out to a friend he claimed was a lesbian. Sure enough, they had a relationship from June to October. He is 39, I am 28, and the other woman was 20. He has stepchildren older than this woman, and daughters closer in age to her than to him. He clearly had time to master his craft. I always listen for covert narcissist phrasing, but he used none. 0. He was supportive, showered me with compliments, encouraged me to have a life outside of him, was there for me during illness, and told me I could accomplish anything I set my mind to. He told a compelling story about his ex-wife being horrible to him, his father abandoning him as a child, and his mother being a narcissist. Combined with using his young children and mental illness as seemingly justifiable reasons for often canceling last minute, I viewed him as a man with avoidant attachment. I thought if I just gave him time, he would come around. He is so sick. He presents himself as part of the straight-edge lifestyle, constantly proclaiming that he disapproves of hookup culture and non-monogamy, all while participating in those exact things. She bought him a $200 bottle of cologne. He told me, "I wanted to smell nice like you, so I went to the store today and had the sales rep help me pick one out." I would make him gifts, and when they weren't out the next time I visited, he'd say, "My kids were messing with it, so I put it up." What finally prompted me to check for a dating profile was when he disappeared for days again. When he resurfaced, he blamed it on being manic. He apologized endlessly and told me he was terrified I would leave him, and I was ready to move forward. Then the next day, I asked him to FaceTime me for 5 minutes, and he said, "I absolutely will." And then he didn't. I called, I texted, nothing. I just had a gut feeling, and there it was. I called him immediately and asked him to put my things outside his place, and he was ice cold. Okay. No questions, nothing. I said, "So, to be clear, we're done." Again, the same ice cold. Okay. I printed out photos of his dating profile and put them in a folder. The other girl and I met up, took a picture together, printed it, wrote notes wishing him the life he deserves, and taped them to the front. We drove to his work and waited in the parking lot for him to get back from break. We pulled up, and I said, "XYZ and I wanted to say we hope you have the life you deserve and wish you good friggin' riddance." He showed no expression, just a blank stare and a 2-finger salute by his hip. We left the folder at his place, and I collected my things. I hope it eats him alive, trying to figure out how he was so sloppy. Pathetic. Story 8. My ex-boyfriend lived an entire second life I had no idea about. He lived with his 7-year long-term girlfriend. He spent 4 nights a week at my place and 3 nights a week with her. He probably didn't go through half the trauma he talked about. He even took me to a fake grave where his dad's funeral was supposedly held and cried hysterically. I met him at my old workplace, where everyone held him in incredibly high regard. No one expected him to be like this. When I found out because his girlfriend texted me, he went missing for 16 hours and supposedly tried to kill himself. His girlfriend and I were awake the entire night consoling each other and trying to find him. The police were looking for him. They're probably still together too. What a joke. Story 9. Before we moved in together, he had a lipstick and lingerie from his affair. He had a long relationship before me and cheated on his girlfriend with this girl. Of course, I told him he had to throw it away or I wouldn't move in. He agreed and said he had thrown it out. Months later, after living together for more than 5 months, I was looking for our swim stuff in our bigger bags. In one bag, I found her lipstick, lingerie, and a note with her line name. They had kept the affair hidden online, deleting chats and messages. I confronted him because it seemed like he was keeping a connection to her open. He said he didn't keep it for her, he just didn't like being told what to do. He spun it as being mad at me for going through his stuff. We separated that night, but I eventually forgave him, and we've been together for 4.5 years since. Still, I can't fully forget it. It was a major breach of trust, and I constantly worry that he might cheat or lie because he already did. I don't fully trust him since that incident. Story 10. He was found to be and investigated for repeatedly viewing CP. They did not press charges because he had not downloaded anything, which I still do not understand. He triggered the same alert enough times that 2 detectives showed up, with a video recorder running before I even opened the door. After more than an hour of interrogation, which I was not allowed to witness, they took his laptop and I am not sure what else. I spoke with one of the detectives a few times, and all he said was that there are some very sick people out there. And that was it. Story 11. After my ex tried to physically hurt me, several things came to light. First, he had been going through my phone for months. We had been broken up for well over half a year at that point, but we were still living together because of financial stress. He used that situation to look through my phone while I slept. He had also been blocking men I spoke to and even changed one guy's contact information to a disconnected number. About a month before the incident, he cracked my phone screen while I was asleep and then convinced me that I must have done it. The reason he decided to hurt me was because he saw forward messages that my coworker had sent me. Messages I had not even responded to positively. Also, the attack was not spontaneous. The night before, he looked at his phone and then told me in a disappointed voice that his boss had taken him off the schedule at the last minute again. He complained about it for a long time. After the attack, I looked through his phone and saw that he had actually texted his boss the night before, saying he would not be able to come in because his roommate was having an emergency and he needed to stay home. I also realized later that when I first walked inside that day, he had been waiting by the door with a baseball bat and gorilla tape. Story 12. I am a long-term gym rat who loves weight training. I am not bulky, just very toned. On our honeymoon, my husband asked me if I worked out because I wanted dong and if I wanted to be a man. In that moment, I knew I had made a terrible mistake. Edit. I didn't expect so much interest in my comment, so let me clarify a few things. A. Yes, I divorced him 1 month after the wedding because of this and several other issues. B. I work out and am very toned, but I have a reserved and feminine vibe. I come from a traditional part of Asia and I am straight. C. Before we got married, he used to complain that I made the decisions and that his friends made fun of him for it. I told him that I was simply used to making decisions, but that I always asked for his input. So, did he have an issue with it? He said no, and that he was completely content with our relationship. 6 months later, during our honeymoon, he made that comment out of nowhere. I think it stemmed from insecurity. He probably felt threatened or embarrassed that I was fitter than he was. I can only guess. I chose not to ask questions after that. Story 13. He had a long history of using his mother and sister while also speaking about them with scathing contempt. Both of them were flawed and selfish, but they loved him deeply and unconditionally. When he casually remarked that his 40-year-old sister, who was gorgeous then and still is, was a fat old woman covered in tattoos, and she needs to start being realistic about how she wants to be treated by a man. That was the moment I knew our days together were numbered. I realized I would never be able to unsee what that revealed about how he regarded women. Story 14. During the recession in 2009, my then husband and I were both studying different university courses and working at the same fine dining restaurant near our apartment. I had worked my way up to bartender and assistant manager over the course of 5 years, and I really loved my employers, a family of extremely hardworking, respectable people. It had taken years to earn their trust, and they rewarded me with more responsibility and decent pay. But the recession hit hard, and one time I had to pay rent on a Friday, even though my paycheck was not due until Sunday, so I was short. My boss fronted me the cash. I cashed my paycheck on Monday and gave the money I owed to my husband to pass along to our boss since he was heading into work and I was going to class. I thought everything was fine until well over a year later, after we had moved to another city for my husband's new job, when my old boss called me and said he really needed me to pay that money back. I was mortified. I questioned my husband, and he admitted that he didn't think anyone would notice, so he had pocketed it. He had done a lot of other really terrible things, but that was the one that truly ended our relationship in my mind. I apologized to my boss, explained what had happened, and paid him back immediately. I still feel so sad and ashamed that my boss spent all that time thinking I had done it. I hope he believed me, but I will never really know. And all these years later, I still feel a deep sadness thinking about it. Story 15. When I first met him, he told me that his daughter had been kidnapped years earlier and that he didn't know where she was. Over several months, I found it odd that he didn't speak much about her. Like, why were you giving up? Why weren't you looking for her? After a year of being with him, I was able to piece things together and found the daughter's mother on social media. He had been fighting for custody but outright refused psychological testing and would not put the child on Medicaid. So the court gave custody to the mother. That was what he meant by kidnapped. While digging for information, I also discovered an animal abuse conviction. That was the end of things with him. A horrible person across the board. Story 16. My ex was pretty active online and used to post a lot on forums. I knew he sometimes trolled on forums and in article comments, but I figured it was harmless because that's how he described it, like deliberately taking the opposite side on an unimportant issue. Anyway, I ended up leaving my ex and getting together with someone else soon after. We ran into a friend of my now husband's who also knew my ex, and this guy was praising me for leaving my ex like you wouldn't believe. He literally bought me a coffee. I had never met him before, and said, "This is because you left your ex." I had no idea why anyone would hold such a grudge against my ex, so I asked my husband. It turns out my ex and my husband's friend had both been users of the same online forum. My husband's friend was a moderator, and my ex did something that angered him, so he got banned. In retaliation, my ex started a new forum in direct competition with the first one, with a strict anything goes, no censorship policy. And if you've begun to guess where this is going, yes, my ex allowed CP to be posted on his forum. My husband's friend and my husband knew all about it. I had absolutely no idea. I asked my husband later why he had never told me, and he said, "I thought you knew." Mate, if I had known that this man was enabling the sharing CP, I would have done far worse than just leaving him for someone else. there would have been immediate police involvement. Story 17. My ex-husband once told me during our marriage how painful it was in middle school and high school when the girls he liked didn't like him back, and how he felt unattractive and rejected. I said, yeah, I used to feel that way too, but luckily in college I met so many cool and interesting people who were attractive to me, and I realized that all that high school stuff was just growing pains. It didn't really matter. He did not agree. He said, no, it does matter, and proceeded to act extremely angry about the whole situation. I realized that my ex had an incel mindset, despite being married to a woman, having a previous wife, and when I met him, having a casual partner as well as many previous girlfriends. Having success with women didn't stop him from hating them or feeling entitled to them as objects. He later said to me about the mothers of our kids' friends, "Why do I have to talk to her, them? I am not going to sleep with them." He wasn't joking. I met my ex while he was pursuing an advanced degree in a humanities field where queer theory and feminist theory were central. Story 18. My ex badly wanted to be an academic in a mostly left-leaning humanities field, so he just kind of faked the politics. Only I didn't know he was faking. He spent a lot of time telling everyone how much of a feminist he was. I thought it was cringe, but probably well-intentioned. Around 5 years in, during one of our increasingly terrible arguments, he explained that sexism wasn't real and that it didn't matter that I had been assaulted as a child because I grew up with more money than he did. From there, it slowly came out that he believed being trans or non-binary was just a mental illness and that his struggles in the PhD program were the result of untalented POC being handed opportunities he thought he deserved. It really helped me realize that nothing he had ever said to me about his core beliefs was true and that I didn't really know him, lol. Since the divorce, he still isn't an academic. He was never smart enough to be competitive, to be honest, but he continues to obsessively post leftist buzzword soup to his social media accounts, even though he doesn't believe it, in hopes of impressing the people he wishes were his colleagues. His average post gets maybe 2 likes and 0 responses or shares. Story 19. I had an ex when I was pretty young and naive, and I believed everything she said. And damn, she told some nasty lies. She lied about a health issue she had, which I only found out years later when a news story revealed her actual condition. She also lied about many other important things, which I slowly discovered while we were together because her stories kept contradicting themselves. The same woman would stop talking to me for weeks at a time, then call out of nowhere like nothing happened. When I asked for an explanation, she said a friend of hers had died, and she was sad. At that point, who even knows if that was true? Oh, and I had another ex who tried to avoid breaking up by lying about having cancer, then later claimed the doctor had confused her with another patient. Some people have really messed up minds. I've made much better choices since then. Story 20. He put a nanny cam in our bedroom so he could spy on my therapy sessions during COVID. He would make a big show of putting on headphones in the other room, pretending to give me privacy because he knew he could just listen later. He even used things I said in therapy against me during arguments. Paul, if you're reading this, I knew after about 2 weeks. I knew when you called me from the Grand Canyon. Screw you forever. Story 21. I met my husband in Narcotics Anonymous. Life pro tip: do not meet your spouse in Narcotics Anonymous. We were both newly clean. Fast forward 7 years. We were living together, still clean, and planning to get married. I became pregnant. Planned. We were both procrastinators, so I was around 8 months pregnant before we realized we probably should get married before the baby arrived. We set the wedding for a Sunday. The Wednesday before, I found a briefcase sitting in our bedroom. It was old, and I had never seen it before. He encouraged me to open it. It was his. It was files regarding his murder case. When he was around 17, he was a dealer with people who sold drugs for him. One of them was a girl around his age. Of course, there were 2 stories, his version and the prosecution's. In the end, he left her under a tree in the woods, where she was found by some hunters. He said he was high and hallucinating. The prosecution said she had shorted him on money. He went to prison for 15 years. I still married him. I was 8 months pregnant and had no family support. He never hurt me, and as far as I know, never hurt anyone else. He relapsed shortly after our baby was born, and I left him about 3 years later. He died in 2011 due to his drug use. Story 22. I had an ex whose best friend was a complete jerk. He pretended to be a young single mother on eBay, claiming her house had burned down and trying to purchase toys that had allegedly been lost in the fire for her child. This was a man in his late 20s. One night, while he was driving home, he hit someone with his car. He called my ex, who was in law school, and asked what to do. It's likely he only clipped the person because the man wasn't seriously injured. My ex told him, "No, you didn't. He was drunk and darted out in front of you." She basically told him to leverage his white privilege while calling the cops and report it that way. Because the man he hit was a person of color, the cops immediately believed that he was drunk and darted in front of the car. The town was very racist to begin with. Birds of a feather flocked together. Two of the grossest people I've ever met. Story 23. It slowly dawned on me that my now ex-husband was incapable of empathy. There were many instances, but here's one that stands out. I broke my leg, and he refused to drive me to the ER because he had to get to work. I drove myself, and they put a temporary cast on my leg with strict instructions not to put any weight on it. Shortly after, I was trying to get down the stairs from our front door to the driveway with my bag for work. He was standing in the doorway, watching me struggle without offering help. I fell and landed in the driveway, bleeding from my arm and head. He took a casual sip of coffee, looked down at me, and said, "Suck it up." Our 12-year-old son witnessed this. His excuse was that he was mad because my broken leg was inconvenient. He is a profoundly dysfunctional human. Story 24. An ex-girlfriend was someone I had known in middle school. Then one day, she just disappeared and nobody said anything. Then, out of nowhere, she was back, reached out to me on Facebook, and we hit it off. Things seemed great. One night, I was at dinner at her mom's and was wondering what had happened to her dad. They all spoke about him, but never gave any details, almost like there was a code. My ex warned me to never ask about her dad, so I left it alone. Almost a year went by, and I finally couldn't ignore the massive elephant in the room. I had started putting two and two together, so I asked my ex, "Hey, there's a lot of weirdness around the subject of your dad. I know it may be touchy, but I'm not sure how we can build a strong relationship if we aren't open and honest about our families." She looked me dead in the face and started crying and said, "I reported my father for essaying me. He's in prison. My mom left him, put me in a girls' school to get better. And we've sworn off ever really talking about the incident. The worst part is, I made it all up." Then she snapped back to normal, as if she hadn't just told me she got her father thrown in jail over a lie. From that point forward, I was literally never alone with her. And about 2 weeks later, I just left. Story 25. I spoke with my ex, H, about the abuse I endured with my first husband, P, and H was so devastated to hear about it. He would go on and on about what a truly messed up loser a man would have to be to lay hands on a woman. Cut to a year and a half later, I felt very uncomfortable during an encounter with H and my body went into full fight or flight mode thinking, am I about to be hit by this guy right now? Although he didn't hit me, I couldn't shake that feeling. My gut told me to reach out to his toxic ex and she agreed to meet me. In that conversation, she revealed that he had been physically abusive toward her and showed me undeniable proof of him hurting her. I left him, and after a lot of back and forth, he admitted it to me. The memory still sends shivers down my spine. Story 26. He had been meeting up with older white men for who knows how long, complete strangers. I had been under the impression he was completely straight. I assume he had cheated with many people. The kicker was that every time we became intimate, I would develop a nasty infection, causing me immense pain and anguish. These infections came around regularly for a year. He saw me crying in pain every week, in and out of doctors' offices, taking medications. He didn't like to wear condoms with me, so I assume he didn't wear them with anyone else either. It got to the point where I begged him to go to the doctor and get tested, because clearly he was giving me bacteria. He always refused and made up lies about the doctors not doing it for him. Looking back, he knew full well why I was getting these infections. When I tried to pause our intimate life to focus on my health, he would get very upset and manipulate me into sleeping with him, fully aware he was making me sick. He would also try to get me pregnant regularly. Don't even ask why I stayed with him. It's mind-blowing to me now. I just didn't put two and two together during the relationship. Story 27. When I finally checked his phone and computer, he was always on his computer. After years of serial cheating, escalating abuse, manipulation, and mind games, knowing our divorce was imminent, I discovered that my ex was a PUA who had been workshopping how to turn me into a compliant bangmaid wife online with a whole community of fellow misogynists. He would turn around to the women and girls he seduced, some still in high school, he was in his mid-30s, and tell them I was a crazy, controlling, abusive partner he couldn't get away from. He'd use stories that were true, but switched. He was the one doing the controlling, manipulative things, and I was the one who should have left years ago. Once I had his online handles, he had so many accounts spanning every possible social messaging app, the year I had to wait for our divorce to go through was hell. I had to act nice to him so he wouldn't try to screw me over with his rich dad's lawyer money. During my out-the-door snoop, I read texts in which he told his friends and family that I had run up thousands in credit card debt without telling him while he paid for everything. If you guessed that was true, but the other way around, you'd be right. The whole time, I was reading years' worth of this alternate identity he had created. I saw comments in which he discussed the most traumatizing moments of my life with strangers, asking for suggestions on how to use that trauma to get me to be more intimately compliant and engage in more extreme acts. I've never meditated so much in my life. It took years to rebuild enough trust in myself to seriously date again. Finding out that every memory you had of your relationship was wrong, and that your life had been publicly exploited as abuse, has a way of making you stop trusting yourself. To recycle a sentiment I've seen in about 80% of the partner stories people have shared here, through all their grisly horror, therapy is amazing. I can't recommend it enough. Story 28. I dated my ex for years. One day I needed to use his laptop for school because my webcam wasn't working, and I had an online class. I texted him at work, and he said, yes, no, problem. He had left his email open. An email I didn't recognize, something like fun couple. I clicked it and found messages he had been sending to men on Craigslist, offering me to them. There were tons of emails where he sent pictures of me to strangers, describing what they could do to me. Everything suddenly clicked. I had been suspicious that I'd been roofied one night when we went out. He had been so adamant that I wasn't roofied and that I was being dramatic. Now I understood why. I packed my things and tried to leave before he got off work. He must have had a hunch because he came home on his lunch break, caught me trying to leave, and completely flipped out. I'm so grateful I got away that night. Story 29. I found out my ex was lying about having cancer. He went to fake appointments, shaved his head and eyebrows, claimed he was getting radiation and chemo, and told me he had 6 months to live. He even bought Pedialyte to put in the bathtub and said his doctor told him to do chemo at home. He had an oxygen tank, said his doctor wanted him on hospice, and pretended to die on several different occasions. And it didn't stop there. He also faked deaths from overdoses, from being attacked by strangers, and from heart failure. He did plenty of other messed up things too, but it would take way too long to list everything. Story 30. The night of our wedding, I found out he had a brother who had the same birthday as me, who died at 10 from cerebral palsy. I was 7 months pregnant and had no idea this could be a genetic risk for us. I was completely shocked. I had known him since I was 16, celebrated birthdays together, and never once had they mentioned another son or any medical issues in their family. It was the first of many deeply wrong lies from him and his mom over the years. I'm still so shocked and wish I could go back and shake that girl, telling her to trust her gut and get out of that marriage immediately. Story 31. My ex told me he was very, very good at getting people to do what he wanted. According to him, people didn't realize that they genuinely wanted to do what he wanted, so it was a good thing. This behavior eventually led me to a nervous breakdown because I felt so trapped. Last I heard, he remains extremely popular and well-liked, so much so that people will do anything he asks, including building his IKEA furniture. One mutual acquaintance even calls his current wife his little slave. I still have nightmares where I'm trying to convince people who believe he is a nice guy that he's actually a sociopath. Story 32. My ex-husband hid a DUI from me for 2 full days. He had hidden many other things before, including a minor car accident, substance abuse, and more. I forgave him every time because shortly after we got married, I was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis, MS, and faced rapid progression and eventual disability. The DUI was particularly shocking. We were unofficially separated. He had decided to stay in an Airbnb for 2 weeks without telling me where he was. I got a voicemail from a DUI DMV advocacy group and called back, acting like the doting concerned wife, to get hold of the police report and confirm what happened. Then the letters from lawyers started arriving. When I confronted him, he downplayed it. I later found out his blood alcohol content was 0.20 even after a blood test. He was high on his prescription meds, drunk, and decided he needed a burrito at 12 a.m. He had zero remorse. The stress of it all caused a hypertensive crisis, and I ended up in the ER a week later. The day after I was discharged, I drove to the courthouse and filed for divorce. It's been almost a year now, and the finalization is a couple of weeks away. The last time I saw him was in March. A few friends ran into him over the summer and said he had gained a lot of weight. He was extremely abusive. I started therapy and learned about covert narcissism. I also had to go on permanent disability as I could no longer care for myself and work full-time. This was one of many reasons I had begged him not to leave. Above all else, I was severely trauma bonded. Being disabled and single has been tremendously difficult. I have no family, and my supposed friends scattered and disappeared when my life was no longer easy for them to relate to. I've been slowly rebuilding my social life, but it has been very hard. Story 33, I had a girlfriend who was diagnosed with cancer, and no one in her family or social circle offered support, helped her, or even came by the house to see her. We had broken up 2 months before the diagnosis, but I still tried to show up every day to support and assist her. Meanwhile, she was falling in love with a romance scammer who took all her money, including her cancer support funds, because she believed she was going to move to Texas with him. She even planned to leave her 2 teenage kids with her family. Even after she realized things seemed suspicious, she kept going. He scammed her out of at least $30,000 as far as I know. Eventually, I found out she had a long history of being an online scam victim, hated her life, and had attempted self-harm several times. The whole time, she was lying to her family about me to cover her actions, blaming me for the mistakes she was making with men and women. She always said, insert name, was only using me for money. But honestly, that was all she had to offer. While I was taking her to doctor appointments and chemo, she was getting scammed and planning her escape. She ended up with nothing. In the end, she blamed the scammer for ruining our relationship and blamed me for everything she did. Story 34. Shortly before things ended with my first long-term relationship, I found out he did not wipe himself unless he had no other option. He preferred to rinse off in the shower and tried to only poop at home. He was permanently constipated from his diet, which probably made that easier. But he also did not use soap or shampoo at all when showering. He smelled very strange and left skin flakes everywhere. My only excuse for dating him is that I was a socially inexperienced 19-year-old. After we broke up, I also found out he had long-running obsessions with really inappropriate things like essay and grape. Even so, the not wiping thing is still alarming. Story 35. Years ago, I was casually seeing a guy who was extremely flaky. He'd vanish on weekends and just say he was working. It was casual, so I didn't question it too much. Eventually, I ended things because I met someone I was genuinely interested in, who is now my husband. A few years later, out of nowhere, I got a Facebook message from a woman asking if I had dated this same guy during a certain time period. I said yes, and it turned out he had been seeing both of us at the same time. She had been dating him for quite a while and was putting the pieces together. We ended up having an hour-long phone call. She was clearly looking for closure, and I answered whatever I could. Then she dropped the real bomb. The reason he was sleeping around so much was because he thought he was going to prison for having an affair with his ex-wife's daughter. There was an active court case, and he was basically spiraling. I felt sick hearing that. Story 36. The first time my now husband jumped out of the car mid-date to fight a man over a road rage incident, I was shocked, truly shaken to the core like I had witnessed a crime. He's in his 50s and still does it occasionally. Somehow, he gets into conflicts with other drivers, though it's never happened to me, and they pull over to fight. Once, it was with one of his friends. Another time, a man followed him to the grocery store and jumped out with a gun. My husband laughed and taunted him until the police arrived. They gave both of them $45 tickets for disturbing the peace and didn't take the man's gun. The most alarming incident was when we were taking our 7-year-old son out for his birthday. A man jumped out of his car in front of us at a red light to fight, mistakenly thinking we were another car he had an issue with. We hadn't done anything to provoke him. He started banging his fists on our hood, and my husband jumped out and threw him to the ground. The man then pursued us in a high-speed chase for the next half hour. It was terrifying, because our son was in the back seat. I do worry about my husband jumping out to fight the wrong person. He loves to fight, but doesn't take the threat of guns seriously. Story 37. Mine isn't as extreme as some of these stories, but I briefly dated a guy who claimed to be diagnosed with autism and ADHD and said he was asexual. I identified as ace at the time, still do since it's a spectrum, and have ADHD, which is why we connected. A big reason I lean ace is that I've been essayed by multiple men in the past, so it's a sensitive topic for me. We eventually became intimate because I thought I could trust him. I even told him that I trusted him more than other men precisely because he was ace, and I believed he wouldn't constantly try to sexualize me. After about 3 instances of this happening, I think I was in shock, so the first couple times didn't fully register. I realized he was touching me inappropriately in my sleep, sometimes under my panties, which would wake me up. When I confronted him, he claimed he had sexsomnia, but never thought to disclose this to me, even after I had shared my history of trauma while getting to know him. We only dated for about a week after this, and he actually broke up with me because he had an issue with me having unresolved trauma. It made me sick to my stomach. Not because I was upset about the breakup, but because I realized how much more damage he could have done to me mentally had we stayed together. I'm now extremely wary of love-bombing behavior. I don't care how much trauma someone may or may not have experienced, or how neurodivergent they are. Manipulative people are just toxic. This all happened shortly after another traumatic relationship with a long-term partner who betrayed me and then left. For a while, I genuinely thought there was something wrong with me that prevented me from having a relationship with someone who respects me. Therapy helped a lot. Story 38. The relationship began around the time I got a concussion at work this past February. My workers' compensation claim was denied, so I had no income. He was living in a halfway house and needed an address, so he moved in. He started handling all the bills while I had no income, and I hired a lawyer. He wasn't working either, but claimed he had tons of money, so I didn't question it. None of it was technically mine, so I didn't pry. He attached me to his bank account. I had a card, but couldn't see the account. Then, my own account got closed because his account had been overdrawn and they pulled money from my individual account to cover it. He opened a new account, and it got closed too. He said it was because of winning at an online casino. He tried to put me on the next account, but I refused. Payments would bounce, and he gave excuses like security issues since the account was in his name but the bills were in mine, or that he needed to transfer money from savings, which took 2 business days. Utilities began only accepting cash. There were notices taped to the door, but he claimed they were BS and already handled and never let me see them. He even got the mailbox key to help out. He started doing these elaborate shows of money. He bought me a brand new car, paid with a check, and when they asked to see his bank account, he showed it on his phone. They accepted it and let us leave with the car. He talked about buying a house with cash and offered to pay for me to go to school. I applied and got accepted. Last month, he came home and said we had to go 2 hours away for one night. He promised it was just a misunderstanding, that his lawyers would handle it overnight, and we'd be back the next day. A week and a half later, we were still away, constantly moving further and further. He kept giving excuses about why we couldn't go home. We stayed in Airbnbs, all booked in my name. He even sold his phone to have extra money because something was going wrong with his bank account. So all calls came through my phone. One of the frequent callers was the dealership where we had bought the car. He always walked away when taking the calls, but finally one person called repeatedly while he was driving, and he answered. I got to hear the conversation. They said, as they had warned him, that if the car wasn't returned by midnight, they would report it stolen. The check had bounced. He claimed he had gotten bank checks and dropped them off, but for some reason, they hadn't accepted them either. We were 9 hours away, and it was only 2 p.m. So we drove back, arriving just after midnight. He had me drop the car off and get a ride home from the dealership, and then we immediately turned right back around and left. We were heading to his very secluded cabin, given to him by his grandfather, where he had stashed a lot of money, hundreds of thousands of dollars. I begged him, let's just do it then. Go get it and go home. Please, I want to go home. We fought about it. every day. He would promise we would go that day, only for us to leave the next morning. We'd start the trip, but he'd get anxious and we'd turn around. "Tomorrow," he'd say, and then we'll go straight home from there. At one point, a friend was supposed to go with us, but he kept having issues. Then it snowed, so we needed a snowmobile, but the only one available was his friend's, which we were planning to borrow. Actually, his friend was going to go get it for us, but he changed his mind. Tonight, the friend was supposed to bring us the snowmobile, but he got stuck at work. "Definitely tomorrow," he said. He even talked about renting a snowmobile or a plane, but never called anywhere until the places were closed for the day. "Tomorrow for sure." Then, Wednesday night, a crowd of police showed up. He had 5 active warrants. From what I've found in news articles, it's mostly fraud and bounce checks. He got arrested. I got a pile of crap. I made the 11-hour drive home yesterday, and today I started trying to fix everything. The apartment wasn't paid for, and an eviction has been approved, just waiting on the order of possession. My car is seriously behind because the payment he sent bounced. Honestly, everything is completely screwed. Story 39. Back in college, I broke up with a military guy because he was super jealous, controlling, and exhausting. Instant messenger was still a thing. And one day I realized he was still logged in on my computer. He would spend hours on it while I watched movies, read, or played guitar, so I never thought much of it. Eventually, I started scrolling and discovered something horrifying. His childhood mentor, an older man from across the country where he grew up, had groomed and essayed him when he was younger, and they were still communicating daily. The messages were unsettling. The older man asking when he'd visit, how much he loved him, and that he didn't regret what they had done. Most of it was the older man love-bombing and pushing boundaries, and my ex responding like a child would, just agreeing. I was stunned for days. He'd already been getting kind of scary with his emotions, so I didn't do anything, and I never spoke to him again. Having no personal experience with SA, I could not believe what I was reading. I probably just sat there staring at the screen for an hour, reading the same messages over and over, completely shocked. Even now, I'm not sure how I would handle a situation like that under normal circumstances. If I had read those messages while we were still dating, do you say anything? Do you confront them? Or do you stay silent? And then there's the gnawing guilt. Am I horrible for prying in the first place? Story 40. She constantly questioned whether I'd cheat on her with a specific female friend of mine, my best friend of nearly 15 years. The paranoia seemed extreme, so I eventually asked if she'd been cheated on herself. She said no. I always honestly reassured her, no, I'm not even attracted to her, and even if I were, I would never cheat, or we'd hate each other if that ever happened. Months later, in the middle of a long hike, she casually mentioned that in high school, she had cheated on one guy with another, secretly dating both at the same time, and feigned ignorance with, "Oh, I told you ages ago," as if I would forget something that important. And of course, she dropped the topic for the rest of our 3-hour hike. To this day, I still don't confidently know whether she was faithful to me while we were together. Story 41. My ex-partner was well-educated, and we were in a long-distance relationship. There was one major thorn in the relationship, his uncle. Not related by blood. His mother and family treated this uncle as the ultimate decision-maker, claiming he would determine whether we could get married. My ex said that if the uncle refused, he'd work it out and we'd figure something. Fast forward to now, he married another girl less than a year after our breakup. Apparently, the uncle saw the future and advised that we would end up divorced and unhappy, so he refused me, and my ex didn't have the courage to stand up to him. Story 42. The father of my son used to tell me these horrifying, detailed stories about his past. He said that when he was a truck driver in the Netherlands, he once took a load to Morocco where customs found drugs someone had planted in his truck. According to him, he was arrested, jailed, and tortured daily. Electroshock to his private parts, beating so bad he nearly died. He described it so vividly that I had no reason to doubt him. Whenever he couldn't sleep, he'd say he was having flashbacks, tears running down his face. He also claimed he'd been kidnapped by an African tribe while working for an NGO. His mom was wonderful, so I assumed he just had a hard life. But when I was 4 months pregnant, she finally broke down and told me none of it was true. She cried and told me to leave him immediately because he was not okay. And she was right. every story he ever told me was a lie. He never even had a trucker's license, had never been to Africa, had never been married to a childhood friend. Nothing. What he had been doing was drugs, other women, and breaking into places to steal. Story 43. My ex, everything I was told before we even started dating, crucial things for me to even consider a relationship, was a complete lie. Almost everything said during the relationship too, but realizing the foundation itself was false, that hits different. Even worse, though harder to process mentally. They groomed at least 3 people into financial abuse or romantic relationships. One of them was me when I was a minor, and I only realized it much later. I had to watch it happen to the others, and any concerns I voiced were dismissed as jealousy. Another disturbing, though less severe thing, they spent a high 3-digit sum on a single online game, while claiming they didn't have enough money for something as basic as a second-hand washing machine. I only saw the receipts for that one game, no telling what else was going on. The clothing situation was beyond disgusting, and again, any attempt to raise it was met with personal attacks. Thank God I never moved in with them. My current partner. They will tell a joke that landed once for the next decades. Even zombies would beg to stay dead at the points when they revived the same joke for the very same audience again and again. They are actually a funny person with a witty mind and can deliver absolute zingers out of nowhere. They don't need to, but it is so typical that by now I can sometimes predict the exact joke several sentences before it happens in a conversation. Yeah, I love that difference a lot. Story 44, I had a massive crush on the older girl who used to cut my hair in college. After gathering up my courage, I finally asked her out. I was just a skinny engineering student, and I'd say she was maybe a 6 in the looks department. Not model material, but nothing particularly striking either. After dinner, we ended up at a bar, and after the 7th shot, her story started spilling out. It turned out she would hang out with her really good-looking friends at bars, clubs, and parties, and according to her, guys would assume her friends were out of their league, so they would hit on her. She let it slip that she might have been with over 500 guys, most of them through meeting men at the salon. She was only 26 at the time, and that kind of ruined it for me. I didn't really see the point of getting serious, so I ghosted her after that night. Story 45. I found out my ex was cheating. Not exactly shocking, but I stumbled onto old text messages saved by Google. I couldn't believe how many people they were talking to. I ended up reading every single message, word for word, and honestly, it still haunts me. The most disturbing part was discovering messages about his stepsister. Same mother, different father. He was talking about her in a very inappropriate way, mentioning multiple times that he would go to her house to help with things. But while there, he was stealing her underwear for nefarious reasons. It still bothers me thinking about it. And that's not even the worst. My ex before him, I accidentally walked in on him wearing my lingerie and clothes while he was with a guy he met on Craigslist. Yeah, I've dated some pretty strange and disturbing people. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you never miss an update.